All right, before the video starts, this is just like this ties into Australia and, what we're talking about today. Stake actually has to change their name, uh, or, has to change their team name for a couple races because of the anti-gambling laws and, they look down on it. So it's for a couple of races. I know the two off my head are Australia and Qatar, but they're going to go by Kick Sauber. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I didn't know that there were laws in place that you couldn't, even talk about gambling. So yeah, that was kind of just a bonus, but I just found that out. It kind of ties in what we have to talk about today. Today we're talking about Daniel Ricciardo. Now, Daniel Ricciardo is an Australian driver, so, I thought this fit in. But there's a lot to talk about because, well, Daniel Ricciardo, ever since his return back, last season after filling in for Nick DeVries' spot, and then he got injured, and then he didn't race for about 6 races, and then he came back, but it just wasn't really the same. Now, he's had some good highlights, such as, getting P1 in some practices, which is pretty good, especially in the car that he was in. But now people are second guessing and questioning whether or not he's, ready or if he should even continue to be in an F1 car. Now, I'm not saying that a whole bunch of people are saying this necessarily, but I'm just saying that I've seen a lot of comments talking about, how he's like, sure, he's 35 and there's drivers older than him, but he just doesn't seem to be going up to his full potential. Driving for the team he's driving for now is literally the way to go to get into Red Bull. So people are wondering if, he actually has the potential to take back his spot that he used to have at Red Bull. And we're going to go over a couple of reasons why that may be true or why it may not be true. But in all seriousness, I mean, it is kind of a touchy subject because we're literally talking about somebody and we're breaking down to see if they're literally good enough to drive or not. So it's a little bit of a weird subject, but we'll get into it. So in true channel fashion, we're going to be reading an article because it doesn't matter. We're going to be reading an article. The title is Daniel Ricciardo hits back after recent struggles with simple response. Despite early season changes and external doubts, Daniel Ricciardo remains optimistic about his prospects in the 2024 F1 season. And we'll get into like the key takeaways and all that stuff in just a second. But yes, this is going to be a lot of reading, but like the last 4 videos have been, so we got to get used to it. So the article does break it into 3 key takeaways, but it says Daniel Ricciardo has offered a concise rebuttal when confronted with comments about his prime being behind him. Just as he gears up for the next Grand Prix, his response has left us with no doubt that he is keen to make a mark this season and help him gain a Red Bull seat once again. So the key takeaways are Ricciardo firmly dismissed concerns about his peak performance, years being behind him. His anticipation for the Australian Grand Prix remains high, marking a significant return after missing the previous year. Challenges early in the season have not dampened his spirit, with Ricciardo looking to bounce back in Melbourne. Daniel Ricciardo, the seasoned F1 driver, found himself at the center of speculation regarding his future in the sport following a series of underwhelming performances in the initial races of the 2024 season. Despite finishing 13th and 16th in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, respectively, Ricciardo's spirit remains unbroken. His recent performances have prompted discussions about whether the Australian racer, now 34, is beyond his prime. This debate was ignited further by comments from 1980 F1 champion Alan Jones, suggesting Ricciardo might be past his best. Okay, so there's kind of 2 things to talk about. One, they talk about how in the first 2 races he finished 13th and 16th respectively, which is true. But I mean, I feel like I'm guilty of this. I've done this multiple times, but it is almost unfair to be already speculating after 2 races. I mean, you've barely seen anything, and we've seen that last year, even in one of the worst cars on the grid, he can do amazing things with it by, pushing it to its complete limit, and he has proved that he can do that, getting P1 in practice. I'm sorry, I forget what race it was. I should know. I should write a script for that, but I did, I forgot about that one. But he did finish P1 in a race practice, which is good, even though practices, not everybody like gets a time and whatnot. Like some people don't have a time at all. That's beside the point. in a bucket or tractor like that, it is insanely good to be seeing, his spirit stay unbroken. Especially with the second thing I want to talk about, a former champion, 1980 champion, Alan Jones, saying that, his prime might be behind him. Now, Alan Jones sure is a much more seasoned driver because, he raced for some years. He's won a world championship. So you might think that, hearing that from a previous world champion, that might dampen his spirit a little bit, but it hasn't. And, Daniel Ricciardo, I feel like, is one of, if not the most positive driver on the grid, even coming back from missing his race due to an injury. He still has the optimism that, I feel like a lot of people wouldn't have after hearing a previous champion talk about how your prime days might be behind you. So during the interview with 10 News, and a reporter told Dan Ricciardo that Alan Jones said that maybe you are past your best. Have you got something to prove in the next few races? Dan Ricciardo would then respond with a brief and stern reply saying, not at all. Dan Ricciardo's recent performance reveal a different story, one of resilience and determination. Despite the challenging start to the 2024 season, Ricciardo's optimism for the Australian Grand Prix shines through. Missing the event last year has only fulfilled his eagerness to compete on home soil, hoping to mark the beginning of a turnaround in his season. His tenure with RB has indeed been rocky so far, with clashes with teammate Yuki Tsunoda in Bahrain and a prolonged 41-second pit stop in Saudi Arabia hampering his results. Yet, Ricciardo's drive and ambition remain undiminished, aiming to contest the narrative by demonstrating his capabilities on the track. So basically, putting pressure on Daniel Ricciardo because he used to have a spot at Red Bull and then doesn't anymore, and he's in line to get back. Saying this, like talking about resilience and whatnot, it was kind of what I was just talking about a second ago. Driving for another Red Bull owned team, which is like the what feeds you into Red Bull. Like, this shows that he has the potential, like him and Yuki Tsunoda, right? It's pretty much they're fighting not only because, they're fighting on the track to get a better position, but they're they are fighting for a spot at Red Bull because unrelated to this, technically, Checo or Sergio Perez, his future with Red Bull is unknown still. I mean, with last year's ups and downs, people were really going at it, saying that Daniel Ricciardo may be the one to take the spot. And, they didn't really talk about Yuki at all. I think they saw what Daniel and Max, the friendship that they had. Sure, a Yuki and Max Verstappen team lineup would be great to see. With the ups and downs of Sergio Perez's season, people were pointing towards Daniel Ricciardo, and even Christian Horner. He didn't say that he wanted Daniel Ricciardo to drive for them. Again, full on specifics. Hey, we want Daniel Ricciardo to drive instead. He said, he still has a spot in his heart for Daniel. So if they were to pick one of the two drivers, I would assume they would pick Daniel. One, because he has experience in a Red Bull car. And two, maybe he's the favorite child of Christian Horner. Of course, below Max Verstappen, but that's just speculation. Support within the paddock for Ricciardo persists, with figures like Eddie Jordan acknowledging his positive impact on the team's atmosphere despite recent struggles. Ricciardo's return to the grid in 2024 with AlphaTauri, now RB, following a brief hiatus, was met with enthusiasm. Reflecting confidence in his experience and skill set, this sentiment is echoed in Ricciardo's own reflections on the season ahead, where he sees a potential for top 5 finishes and possibly podiums if the circumstances align. The backdrop of Ricciardo's 2024 campaign is complex, marked by moments of both promise and frustration, but with us being only 2 races into the 2024 season, it's far too early to draw any conclusions. I think this article it makes a lot of good points. I mean, sure, it uses tiny pieces from the interview that Daniel had with, 10 News, and him just simply saying that he doesn't have anything to prove at all. Not necessarily he doesn't have anything to prove, period, but for somebody else, he doesn't have anything to prove. He's just doing his thing. He's racing. That's what he loves to do. He's racing, and he does want a spot at Red Bull once again. But obviously, it has to be with the right circumstances. And like it said, the circumstances have to align first. Him getting potential podiums or top fives, which I do think are possible. And I believe a lot of people think that as well. Now, I'm not speaking for everybody when I say this, but I'm pretty sure Daniel Ricciardo is one of the better drivers on the grid. Not only was he given like a pretty bad car, but he was injured for like 6 weeks during the 2023 season, and coming back after a hiatus is hard. I mean, he has succeeded technically, not in points, but in recognition. I mean, he's always had recognition. Even when he wasn't racing, people were still thinking about him and talking about him and looking back on the days where he was back, in the Red Bull with Max. And I mean, I think it's great. I think that he definitely does have a chance. And same with Yuki. Now, this is a video about Daniel, but I do want to talk about Yuki for a second because he's also in the, the feeder program to Red Bull, also driving for the Racing Bulls or RB. And he does have a lot of potential as well, though he does have anger issues, not necessarily anger issues. And, like I do understand that some drivers have more intense feelings when it comes to races, but Yuki still has driving experience, and he is very much capable of getting top tens. He's done it multiple times before. Looking back at his first season and his season now, it's a huge difference, and he's done a great job. So I'm sure that they will pick Daniel Ricciardo if by any chance they will have to move Checo somewhere else, or if he has to leave the team. I'm sure they will look at Daniel Ricciardo, but Yuki is also in the back, just looking it in, and I believe that he definitely has a chance as well. But with this video being about Daniel Ricciardo, I kind of have to point towards Daniel instead of Yuki, but that's just me, and again, that's just speculation. And also going back to something a little bit that people talked about earlier in the week was the pit stop that he had. Now, this isn't really related to his future, but I thought while we're talking about Daniel, might as well talk about this pit stop because it was something, and I want to get this video a little bit longer. So we will talk about the pit stop, and a 41-second pit stop is terrible. I mean, you've seen, looking back at Stake, Sauber, they have had two bad pit stops in the first two races of the season, one with Valtteri and one with Zhou. So pit stops are the most important thing in a race because without pit stops, you can only drive so far, right? Until the wheels just give out. So the 41-second pit stop that Daniel Ricciardo had was something to see. It was horrendous. Now, it wasn't necessarily anybody's fault, but the team did acknowledge a tire issue during the pit stop. So obviously, you have to take longer if you have problems. And sure, it, affected him and put him at the back of the grid. But, I mean, you can't really do anything about it. Even Alan Permain had to come out and say that we had a problem with the tires during his pit stop. It put him at the back of the field. Nothing more, nothing less, which is very unfortunate. But people were talking about this. As you can see, this is from an Instagram post. So it was very unfortunate. I mean, like I said, having a pit stop like that it's kind of embarrassing. Daniel Ricciardo encountered a series of unfortunate events during the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, culminating in a frustrating race weekend. Amidst the chaos of the race, a pivotal moment occurred during a safety car period when Ricciardo's team, Visa Cash Up RB, faced a critical issue during a pit stop. This resulted in a prolonged 41-second pit stop, drastically affecting Ricciardo's position and ultimately regulating him back at the pack. So what was going to be a normal pit stop under a safety car, which would have been a great idea too if nothing had gone wrong, like it would have been very helpful to get that pit stop, finish it first, and then go, drive behind the safety car. But I mean, that is literally like the worst timing possible. And it's just, like it says here, a series of unfortunate events. And I'm sure that, like, I don't want to assume anything, but I'm sure that if this pit stop didn't happen the way it did, I'm almost positive that Daniel would have had a little bit of a better race. I mean, I'm not going to say that he had the best pace. It was quite the opposite. But I feel like anybody given the chance could have a good race. But something like this, really just tarnishes the entire thing. And then I promise the last thing I'm going to talk about it was Daniel's thoughts on the pit stop. He said it was a tough race and overall a tough weekend, which is very frustrating. During the safety car time, when almost everyone pitted, we had a slow pit stop, and a few laps from the end, I made a mistake and hit too much curb in turn 1, which caused a spin. I'm staying optimistic though, as I know we have some positive signs and we'll just need to polish our package up. We have a few weeks off. We have a week off now, and there will be big push from everyone to get it right and make sure that we have a good package for the next race. I know the team wants it as badly as I do. I'm excited to go back racing in Melbourne, so let's get ready for it. So that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about, the speculation people had with Daniel's future and even big names in the sport and what they had to say about it. And then the pit stop was something I just thought I would mention because it sucks and it kind of, it doesn't tie in necessarily to his future, but it ties into how unfortunate he's been. So, I mean, it sucks, but we literally have 22 races left in the season. So all we can do is watch and see. And I'm going to put my tally mark in the section that Daniel Ricciardo is going to have a good season. I'm going to knock on wood. I don't want to jinx anything, but here's to hoping. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. I don't want to beg, so I'm not going to say please subscribe, but it would be cool if you did. Not almost, but we are nearing 100K, which is amazing. I'm going to keep saying this for every time I do a segment like this talking about the channel, but I'm going to keep saying this, and even when we pass 100, 200, 300, whatever, I appreciate you guys. So thank you for all of that. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.